welcome back to another episode with Della Roots. I'm your host, Anita, with your host, Mireya, and today we're going to be talking about privilege with our special guest, Kalani Robinson. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, y'all. Well, my name's Kalani. I'm 23 years old. I reside in Compton, California. I go to school at Cal State LA as a Pan-African Studies major and trying to dabble in a minor in criminal justice just to understand the system better to debunk mass incarceration. Currently, I identify myself as far as like my work mindset as a community organizer. I'm out in the field. I'm always trying to find something new as far as like what can we do action-based organizing. I'm really passionate just about like making sure like I do what I say and say what I mean and just trying to implement good in the world. So that's a little bit about me.
I love that. Welcome. We're glad to have you here and share some of your thoughts on privilege, essentially. So before we get into our conversation, a little plática, I do want to cover the types of privilege to our listeners. At least for me, just speaking for myself, when I was I'm going to say CC when I say community college, because I feel like I say it all the time. But when I was at CC, I only knew about white privilege. That was the only type of privilege I knew about and I was exposed to, that I was aware of. And so we want to cover the privileges are pretty much multifaceted. And so they come in different shapes and places in our lives. And so these are 8 types of privileges. 1, I had already said, was white privilege. 2, we've got heterosexual privilege. And 3 is religious privilege. 4, socioeconomic. 5, gender. 6, able-bodied. And 7, cisgender. And lastly, 8, colorism. And so when talking about these privileges, privilege does not mean you had an easy life, right? It doesn't mean that everything has been handed to you. All it means is that there are some things in life you will not experience or even have to think about because of who you are. And so we're going to talk about that tonight, and we will not hold back, right? We're going to keep it as real as possible. At least we'll try to. But each person's identity is complex and is made up of several different components. And we call that intersectionality, which we talked about. Anita tapped into in our last episode, right? And a few of our episodes, actually. And so because of this, people may experience privilege in some areas, but lack privilege in others. And a lot of times I come across this conversation with white folks specifically, where they'll say, oh, like, I have white privilege, but are you saying like I didn't struggle? Like I didn't have a hard life? You know, and it's like, no, we're just saying that because you are white, because of how you look, you already had an upper hand compared to me or compared to other BIPOC folks, right? And so that's what we'll be talking about today. It's not an attack on anybody. Again, this is just to really be aware and be conscious of that, because even as people of color, even as BIPOC folks, we too have different privileges. It could be in socioeconomic, it could be religious, and so on. And so my first question to our guest is, what are your types of privileges that you are aware of? And when did you realize you had these privileges? Like at what age or in what type of space in your life were you aware of that? And what did it feel like?
So for myself, I want to say that when I was younger, I didn't really recognize that I had a privilege. Now, before I even just get to that, you feel me? I always tell people, like, you know, personally for myself, I never had like a real stage where I did not love myself, if that makes sense. Like, I always was a proud little black girl. Like, I loved my hair. I loved my skin. I loved my style, my swag. I loved myself to the fullest extent of my culture before I really even know what a culture was for real. And a part of what my personal culture was is that I recognized, like, oh, I didn't have all the money in the world, you know, and I also learned about how my people didn't have a lot of access to power at a very, very young age, you know? So I had no idea that privilege for me as a Black woman or as a Black girl at the time even existed. I started to realize more as I was getting older, like, it's like a saying, I feel like, when people be like, you know, be grateful kind of just what you have and pay attention, you know? And so I don't hear that. I'd be like, yeah, I'm grateful, but you don't really get to notice how much like certain things in life can either be stripped or taken away from you. If you don't open your eyes like big enough and realize like, hey, like I have all my limbs, like, you know, like, hey, like I can walk. Hey, like I can sleep at night. Like, you know, like I didn't realize like how much like I actually should have been, I guess, grateful for, because those things were a privilege. And I didn't really recognize those things until I got to about high school for myself. So I was like 2012 to 2016 when I really had an awakening, like, wow, like, you know, there's plenty of things that I should be grateful for and I should recognize. And that inspired me to want to help people that didn't have whatever privilege that I may have had. I do have like a method of figuring that out, but I feel like that's going to come a little bit later. So I'm not even going to talk about that right now, but yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good. Anita, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to privilege, it really hit me when it was like, I want to say senior year of high school. And I realized that it's when everything was like coming into perspective for me, and like who I was and where I lived and the family that I grew up in. Relatively, I grew up in like, I would say, a middle class household. So yeah, I did have struggles from time to time. But well, not me, my mom did, but she never really showed me that, which is interesting because I would like talk to her about it, and I'm like, you know, like I don't feel like we really struggled as much as other people. And she's like, well, I would never tell you when I was struggling. And I'm like, oh, so you would hide it. And then I started reflecting. I'm like, oh, there were times when my mom would cry in the bathroom and I had no idea why she was crying. And she would tell me like sometimes I couldn't afford certain, like the rent or certain things. My mom would just be like, why are you saying that out loud? I'm sorry, Mom. Um, but I still think that I had a certain level of privilege compared to other people because I did have a roof over my head. I did have clothes on my back. I did have food on the table. And my family was always there for me. My tia, my mom, my grandpa, my tío. I always had this support system. And I know that a lot of people don't necessarily have that. And also just when it comes to the school that I decided to go to, I went to performing arts school, and it is a public high school, but still I was able to I had the privilege of being able to go to that high school, and being able to kind of venture out and understand the world and how I wanted to navigate myself within these spaces. And I think also in high school, my mom, which to me at first, when she told me, do you want to go on this trip? I was like, no, like that's hella expensive. But as my senior gift, I did go to Europe. I was able to do that. I've never been able to do that again because it's super expensive. But I was like, damn, there's a lot of kids and there's a lot of people that might not ever be able to have that experience in their life because people are going to be tight on money and stuff. And so that's when I realized I have some certain level of like money privilege, class privilege, even though I'm still like middle class, but there's, you know, leeway in certain things that I can be able to buy for myself and stuff like that. And I think also within the family that I grew up in, it was predominantly white. But I was talking to someone once, and they mentioned, because I told them, I was like, aren't I privileged in a way since I grew up in a white household, and well, not like just a immediate family kind of household, because whatever, I'm not gonna explain it. I don't want to explain it again, but they were like, well, do you benefit from that white privilege? And I'm like, not really. Like, I just exist here. Like, it's not like I'm getting more money, it's not like I'm getting more resources, it's just the connection that I have. And for the longest I was like, well, I do have privilege because I relatively kind of grew up in a white household. But then to be asked that, I was like, oh shit, well, no, I don't own properties like most of them do. I can't really do certain things that they can. I experience the world in a different way. I can't just act like blindsided of certain things that are happening within my community because it's happening to my people. So it was interesting when I was asked that, because I always thought I had some level of privilege when it comes to that. But they were like, well, if you don't benefit from that privilege, then like you technically don't have that privilege. And I was like, oh, interesting. But even in the area that I grew up in, it's predominantly white, I would say. And I feel like there's some level of resources that I'm able to reach that other folks are not able to reach. So I would say that I do have relatively a good amount of privilege. And just even being in college for me, yes, I struggle. Yes, it's a lot of money out of pocket that we have to pay for school, but still, I'm still able to attend, and it's not like I have to like drop out. So yeah, that's my privilege.
No, yeah, you tapped into some good, made me think about some similar privileges as well as yours, Anita. For me, I didn't know I was privileged again until like I got this most recent job. I started to realize and count the different areas in my life where I was privileged, because again, the only privilege I knew was white privilege. I didn't know about class privilege, well, I didn't know about colorism, obviously, but different, and in different spaces and places in my life. And so, for me, it was, specifically with a past partner that I was with, and, at least for like colorism and my light skin privilege, because here I am in community college, right? And I'm trying to have my little activist, I was in that moment in a space where I could do activism, because that's also a privilege, which we talked about in our last episode, right? Is to be able to be out loud and proud and be active and in the community, because sometimes, so we had talked about that. But with my previous partner, and sometimes with my current partner as well, is because they are darker complexion, they happen to be Black. It was when we are in a Latinx predominantly community and they look at us some type of way because we are, quote unquote, like a mixed couple. And so that's where I experienced that, and I never experienced that with any other person other than that person. And so that made me like, oh, the fact that I'm not aware of that and I don't experience that alone, that's my privilege. The fact that, or even when I would unconsciously put my partner in, like, there was a moment, just real quick, we were in Woodland Hills, it was 11 o'clock at night. I don't even know if I already shared this story, so I don't mean to be like repetitive, but it was 11 o'clock at night. We met halfway because he was visiting and from Texas. And we met halfway in like Thousand Oaks-ish area, Woodland Hills, and it was 11 o'clock at night, and we're getting gas. We're playing around trying to pay each other, because he was trying to pay for my gas and I was trying to, like, and so we were going back and forth, just kind of goofing off, and two cop cars come up and they like yell on the mic. They're like, "Are you okay, lady?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. We're just playing around." They're like, "Oh, okay." And then like drive by slowly. And I'm like, oh, it kind of, I was like, what just happened? And so he's like, yeah, we can't be here. We got to go home. And so just scenarios like that where I'm like, I unconsciously put him in a